I really like that analogy about the state of culture when it comes to our movies. Like we're bringing backwards or bringing forwards action heroes from like the 50s and 60s. And also you
Yep.
can hear it in our political slogans, right? Like make America great again or build back better, depending on like which color that you align with. We're trying to like restore the past. And we're fearful, perhaps xenophobic of the future. But I think there's a reason why, Balaji, you are a crypto person, is because of all the populations, all the people, all the communities out there. The crypto people of the world are one of the few populations that's actually optimistic of the future. So it sounds like your solution for this is to not try and restore the past. That tends to not work in history. But there's a quote from, I think, Winston Churchill that I always love, where if you find yourself going through hell, keep going. Like, don't
Yeah.
stop. Break on through to the other side. Is that the future that you are trying to herald for us here?
I'd say 75% yes. Let me give the 25% that is different, right? The 25% is I am not um anti like okay, so for example, let me motivate this in one way. Have you used undo
I
in
have not.
any app?
No.
Yeah,
You've never
Oh,
used
absolutely.
undo in any app.
oh,
No,
on Command
absolutely.
Z? Oh, every single day.
Command Z.
Okay,
That's
right.
what
Yeah,
you call,
Command
that's
Z.
what
Okay.
David calls it, Command Z.
I was like, whoa, this guy never misses a keystroke, right? Okay. All right. So you've used undo. Are you a programmer? Have you used git revert?
No, no, I have not.
Okay. So git revert is basically like you probably, the concept somebody introduced a bug and they have to revert it and go back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Go back to an old
if you think
state.
about undo, you think about previous file versions, you think about backup and restore, you think about that kind of stuff. It actually is useful sometimes to rewind to move in a different direction. It doesn't mean rewind to go, quote, back to the past and stay there, but rather we took a wrong turn. And so we need
Mm,
to take this other turn, right? And if you agree with that on a micro scale of undo, right, you
mhm.
actually probably agree with it on a mezzanine scale because companies actually spend a lot of money on backup and restore, right? To be able to back up your data from a week or a month ago, right? And in fact, blockchains are about an indelible history in many ways. That's a big part of their value proposition. Like property that can't be seized from you has that past, that history, that base, right? This is what I call the relationship between microhistory and macrohistory. Microhistory is a history of measurements on a system. Macrohistory is like, what we think of as history, like, pottery shards and records of ancient Rome. But those things relate with crypto history because it's got the aspects of microhistory like individual measurements, but it's the scale of an entire society because it's the entire economy and it's every communication and it's all the users. We're just built like history is beginning in a sense in we're in year 13 anno Satoshi. Okay. Like the true start of written history was maybe thousands of years ago. The true start of crypto history was 13 years ago. Okay.
Mhm.
With that kind of framework, things don't necessarily always just get better, uniformly. Things are more complicated than that. Prices sometimes go down before they come back up. You sometimes need to undo and go back. You don't make the exact right turn every time. We're not infallible. Because we're fallible, we need to have metrics that say when the past actually was better to take a step back and then move forward in a different direction, right? And if you actually look at, for example, the Renaissance, right? That was inspired by antiquity, right? They rediscovered all these things from classical. They're like, whoa, those old guys did some amazing stuff. And then with that, they were able to push forward. They didn't have to reinvent the entire wheel. In a sense, one point I make in the book is with physics, for example, we think of physics and science and so as being totally different from history. But there's actually a relationship. And what that is do you guys know any physics? Do you know any a little bit?
Yeah,
Basic, yeah.
definitely.
Okay, basic. All right. So the equations of physics are written as like F equals ma or
Mhm.
more F equals dp dt, Maxwell's equations. Those actually are a distillation of lots and lots of experiments of
Mhm.
essentially
Mhm.
the history of all of these investigators. And rather than having all of their verbal stories and whatnot, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and redo hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of man years of experimental work, you encode that in one equation, you move forward from there, right? So you take the lessons of experimental history, encode an equation, and that foundation stone allows us to get to Mars.
Right.
We don't realize that in science because it's like mathematical, but that mathematics did not just come out of nowhere. It came out of a distillation of all this past stuff. And the same way, understanding like sort of the physics of human beings and how they collide into each other, and having some sense for history, you know, it is possible, I think, to build better systems when you can benefit from the life experience of millions of other people and that distillation, just like you can from physical law. Let me pause there. So that's why I say I'm not a completely
Right.
the past sucks kind of guy at all, actually. I'm definitely future oriented and whatnot, but
Mhm.
as I gave some arguments for, I think it's useful to think about a rewind and then like a
Right.
repositioning to move forward.
Right. Yeah. This reminds me of Back to the Future 2 or 3, where they go into the wrong future and then they have to
Yeah,
go back to the old future to go forward. And this is
right.
just, basic respect for the lessons that we've learned throughout history, right? And
Yes.
so humans, we experiment with things, we learn new things, we try and go forward in one direction, and then we learned that we were actually off base. So we have to rewind and go one step backwards to back to our core foundations so we can go forward in like a new direction that we actually learned was better.
Exactly.
And
Progress is a vector. It's not just a scalar. They say it's not just that we're going forward or back. It is we could go forward, but on a different axis. We're just, we're moving to space as opposed to, another society might be all about the oceans, right? Another human society might have been like their number one thing is to figure out what's at the bottom of the ocean. Everybody was obsessed with that, and so on and so forth. You can imagine different vectors for what progress look like, right?
right.
Let me pause
And
there.
this is something that we talk about on Bankless all the time. The American Constitution is a great piece of just like fundamental, what feels like political science, right? Definitely is political science. But the current manifestation of America feels misaligned with that basic foundation. And so I think the idea, perhaps this is where we can start talking about the network state, is like, let's go back to some core principles because this current direction is a little bit off the rails. So let's go backwards a little bit so that we can go forward in a new, more refined direction that takes our current context, our current global macroeconomic context into account because we've gotten off track. And it
That's
sounds like
right.
I'm going to go ahead and guess, Balaji, that the network state is your proposed next vector for humanity.
Well, it is a toolbox, not a manifesto.